What's going on, guys? Hey, I'm just sitting out here in the backyard with my beautiful puppies, enjoying an overcast day, but it's cool here in Texas. And anything y'all know about Texans is we got to take advantage of any cool day that we get, especially this time of year and moving forward. But I wanted to take this time and just thank you, everybody, for the support of this podcast. But more importantly, I want to take this time to thank people like Chris Price, Jason Pillow, Vicky Joy Anderson, and the like. And I want to also take this time to remind you guys, May 18th through the 21st, I'm going to be speaking at the Here Am I conference in Spring, Texas at Spring First Church, just outside of Houston. And I want to encourage anybody that is listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, to go on to archangelministries91.com. And if you can come and you've got that time to dedicate, even if you're in the Houston area and you can come out 18th and the 19th, just come on out and hear some good preaching and teaching on human trafficking, on what's going on in the world. I'm going to be speaking on AI and transhumanism and how it impacts that world and how it's going to impact that world in the future, and what we can look at as far as eschatology around that issue. But more importantly, come to the Archangel Ministry 91. I'm going to put the ad up here, and I'm going to put links in the bio to this podcast. Just come on out. But more importantly, I'm excited about this podcast. We're going to be speaking with Brandon Black on how the heavens declare his glory. So thank you again. Love you. Appreciate all of you, and God bless. Is Joe Sheehan, and I am coming to you with another Christian Underground podcast. I am super excited and just really feeling blessed to have our brother Brandon Black here with us. He is a pastor and he is a resident expert in all things celestial. So we're gonna get him going here. So hey, Brandon, how you doing today, buddy?
Fantastic. I'm really glad to
Excellent.
be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. I know that we've tried to get you on here probably twice, and I've had to cancel just recently. But now I'm glad that we've got you here to get this going. So, what I'd like you to do is just to kind of take a few minutes and let people in the Christian underground world know who you are, where you're from. Just give us an elevator pitch of who is Brandon Black.
Okay. Well, as you know, my name is Brandon Black. I'm from North Carolina. And so it's about, I don't know, 10 years ago, God called me to do ministry full time. And it was, I know that not everybody has what they would think of as supernatural experiences, but it was for me. God woke me up from a dream, and I was very tentative about doing it because, quite frankly, I think we've all seen what can happen with people in the pastorate, and I've had my fair share of people I've known who are pastors who go down a bad hole, or it's just really rough for them. Life is difficult, and so I think, as Christians, though, that's something that we should all expect, that life can sometimes be difficult, and that it's not going to be easy if we're giving him our all. And so it was a very easy decision, say, okay, well, that's what you want me to do, I'll do that. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. Honestly, I had the contemporary church model in my head. um, and, I thought, well, okay, well, I'll find a church to work at and I'll be a pastor. And God had different plans for me. I think of myself as doing a home based ministry. Some people would say you have a home church, um, but I really think of it more as being a home based ministry because I don't have a like church building that I go to. Maybe someday, if God provides that, but um, so it's my ministry extends past just the home though, so that's why I say it's home based. We don't just meet here, and it's not just inside the walls of my house. So um but I'm part of what most people would kind of think of as like being messianic Jewish. I mean, I'm not considering myself Jewish at all, but kind of in that vein of thought and expression as far as our religious practice goes. Um, and it's been a fun ride. Just being a believer, to be honest. The word is rich and our faith is if we get past the milk, it's it is interesting to say the least. So I really enjoyed that. I've also in this walk, he called me to go back and complete a Bible and theology degree, and he put me on that path. I never thought I would go back to school. I thought I was done with school, but he put me on that path, and so I completed a bachelor's degree and then a master of arts in theological studies, and for the past several years, I've been working on a doctorate degree in Bible exposition. And all that really is, most people say, well, what does that mean? Because, I know, Joe, you're familiar with theology, so most people don't know all those big theological words, right? And or the things, the Christianese or whatever that we sometimes have there in the scholastic field. But just Bible interpretation, basically. It's the main focus of the degree is interpreting the Bible, in its historical, cultural, and literary context. So that
Uh,
that's a nutshell.
okay. Yeah. Hey, that's a nice nutshell. Well, and then I guess the question, where did you, where are you currently studying? Where, and under whom?
Okay, I'm with Liberty University, and I am not in the online program, and so there's um, there's a lot of teachers in the online program that I've had. Uh, More some of them a few times, to be honest, but the instructors at Liberty are top notch, and I know it's an online program, so it's not the same as sitting in a residential school, but the instructors there are just great. And for me, I think the biggest thing is their Christ-like character that is on display quite a bit. And so we don't always have to agree on theology with everybody, but our character should always be reflective of Christ, and to me, that's the biggest thing. And so I really enjoyed it there, and I've had the opportunity to, being an online student, to
Uh-oh. Lost your audio there, bud. Give me a sec.
okay, can you hear me?
All right, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, we'll cut in. So kick back in, kind of go back, rewind a little bit, and go right
Okay,
back where
yeah.
you started.
So
We'll edit it in.
yeah, back at Liberty. So I'm at Liberty University, online student there, and I've really enjoyed it. They have great instructors, um, doing an online degree is not the easiest thing. You know, I think there's pluses and minuses to being an online student versus residential, and so flexibility is the big thing. And when you're a middle-aged person and you have a family and you have other things going on in life, flexibility is something you have to have. So, but it is a great school, and yeah, and I would recommend their programs to anybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're a big Liberty family.
Mhm.
My wife got her master's in Christian counseling. Well, actually, Christian counseling leadership or something like that. 'Cause she wasn't actually able to finish her licensure, so she took the degree that she could finish, and then I unsuccessfully tried two different degrees there. More The first one was I went to the law school there, where that's not an online option. And I did a year, and unfortunately, I C'd myself out because you have to have a
Gotcha.
B or higher,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay, and my average was a 2.9
Mm.
in law school. So, but like what you said, the professors are incredible. And then shortly after pursuing maybe a couple of years after that, I tried my hand at a PhD at Liberty, and doing political public policy analysis and
Mm.
looking at technological ethics, and got about 18-20 hours into that PhD and ran out of money.
Mm.
So if the Lord ever decides that I will have enough money, I do would love to go back, because I
Yeah.
did love going to Liberty. We're a proud Liberty family. Um, so yes, and one of the big people that we're a huge fan of, Dr. Heiser was a professor there for a while,
He
for their
was.
online program. Yeah, for their online program. So I have a bachelor's and master's myself, and the master's I got online, and so online works for people who need that flexibility of schedule. So
Yeah.
I love it's really good. Well, hey, so let's talk about the reason why we had you on here is I heard you talking on, I think it was the Blurry Creatures podcast, and or it might have been Camp Hermon, I can't remember.
Camp
Uh,
Hermon. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Camp Hermon. There it
Hmm.
is. And yeah, and love Chris, love Tori, love Mikey. Matter of fact, I was just on not too long ago doing their tinfoil hat trivia, so that was a lot of fun.
Okay. I bet that was fun.
Yeah, it was. And so just really enjoy them. They're a big reason why this podcast was started, and really got that inspiration from them. And Chris has just been a huge friend through all of this. And there, I don't think there was maybe more than 1 or 2 days that went by when my mom went into the hospital that he wasn't texting me, just encouraging me. So gotta love Chris Price.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but with that being said, I heard you're speaking on stars, and
Hmm.
speaking on the biblical language surrounding the star language within the
Right.
Bible. And I know that that is a very near and dear subject to you. I myself went to a church that for a long time, where the pastor there would have star parties and different things like that, and he would go through the constellations, and he would talk about those things. But I would like for you, I'm going to kind of give you the reins, so take the wheel and walk us through that star language. Walk us through what you've kind of prepared for us today.
Okay. Absolutely. So, yeah, I usually say astral language, and so you can say star language as well because it means the exact same thing. Um, mm, so this has always been something that was a little bit of an interest to me. I like things that are different, and if it's boring, I'm not much into it. So if it holds some sort of a mystery, and then I'm like, oh well, let's look at that because that's interesting, So there was just enough of astral language on the surface of the biblical text that drew me in to say, what's going on? Right? What's going on here? There's something in the Bible here that's they're talking about stars in such a way that there's something going on, and it's not astrology, right? Like the sense that people practice today, where it's all about fortune telling and like what's your sign, and that's going to determine how you live the rest of your life. Like there's nothing like that. There's something else going on, and so when I was began my not began my dissertation, haven't begun that yet, but when I began my PhD, we the first class we talked about dissertation, and he wanted us to start thinking about it, and throw some topics out there, and discuss different topics that we were interested in. And this was one of those that I was like, well, here's something that's interesting. And he said, and I said, I really think I'd like to look into this a little bit more. And the teacher was very encouraging. He said, yeah, that would be really great to see some of that. And so um, my first foray into this was with the blessings of Jacob in Genesis chapter 49, because I had heard and I had read in some text and whatnot that there was something to the zodiac in connection with the 12 tribes of Israel. And I had kind of seen this before, and I was like, well, I'm not the type of person that's going to go for speculation. That's just not me. I know that it's really easy, right, for us to look at something and say, well, I think this means that, right? And, we can be, the church has a history of using allegory. And I'm not into allegory. I want things to be grounded in fact. And I want to know that um, my interpretation of the word of the Bible is set. Like it's not speculative. It's not going to be allegorical. It's not that it can't be undermined, so to speak. Um so that's always important for me. In fact, whenever I have an idea about the text that seems like different, right, or strange, my first goal is to prove myself wrong. So I want to say, is there a way for me to, okay, I think maybe I see this in the text, but let me try to prove it wrong, right? Let me try to say that that's not right. Um, Especially if it's hard for me to find other people who have the same view of the text. There have certainly been times in translation, which, I know a lot of people don't read Greek and Hebrew, and I'm not an expert on it, although I've had plenty of classes. Um, but there's tools that you can use, and so I always translate the word whenever I'm teaching from it, because I want to read it in the original languages. And so sometimes we come across things that when you're reading it, you say, well, it seems to say this, but maybe I'm wrong. And so sometimes you'll actually find a handful of Bibles that translate it that way. Sometimes you'll find one. There's been a lot of times where I'll find one, and sometimes it's one of those, not is not usually the NIV or the ESV or the King James, right? It's usually one of the
Right.
others that aren't quite as popular. And so I like different Bibles for different reasons, so that's okay. And so I usually appreciate it, and I like to, when I see a one of those different versions come up with something that seems weird, it's like, okay, well, this Bible right here translates it the same way I see it. Um, so, um, all that to say, Genesis chapter 49 is one of those chapters that has some difficult language in it, right? It's
Mhm.
got some things in it that if you were just to translate it literally, word for word, then it wouldn't make a lot of sense in some places. And I knew that. And so
Mhm.
I said, well, I've heard about this. I'm like, let me, and like, most of us have. heard of like the Lion of Judah. Like we all know that, right? Most Christians can easily recognize that, and people are like, oh, well, that matches Leo, and well, what about all the others, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
easy one, right? But what about all the others? Because a lot of the others aren't easy, to be honest. Um, but in my research, I started some of the works like Seiss and Bollinger and who's the other lady who wrote one? I can't remember now. Um, but there's three books that were written about I don't know what 120 years ago or something in that
Hmm.
ballpark, and they all kind of follow this gospel, right? What they say, the gospel in the stars, or the witness of the stars, or whatever,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and so they talk about these things. Well, I wasn't content with that because that's not the way we do modern scholarship. But it was a good starting place, to be honest.
Hmm.
They had some interesting ideas. And so I started looking into things like the names of the individual stars and how the constellations were viewed in different places, because the constellations have changed a little bit over time. But for the most part, we still have what was in the ancient sky as part of our pictures, right? The constellation pictures that we have are for the most part what was in the ancient sky. I'll give you a very simple, and since I can share, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this because this is fun. Let me, so,
Well, yeah, you
um,
mentioned so you mentioned and the only reason why I bring this up is this is the only book I got.
okay.
Okay. So but you mentioned Bullinger,
Yes.
and so E.W. Bullinger is a British theologian. He's writing in the waning part of the 19th century. He's putting together some some pretty interesting ideas of what in one of the in 1893 is when he wrote
Hmm.
The Witness of the Stars. And so he's putting together some pretty interesting ideas. He's bringing in the idea of the Jewish zodiac, as it were, and he just did what you were talking about, where what were the constellations for the tribes and things like that. And obviously, the most obvious one is the Lion of Judah, is Leo, those types of things. But one of the things that I found that was really interesting, and again, we can get back to this. I don't want to steal your thunder, and if you want to go
Yeah.
ahead and share your screen, go ahead and do that. I can talk while you do that. But is when he was talking about the Tower of Babel, because one of the things that he touches on is that the Babylonians were us astronomers, right? That the Babylonians were the guys that were studying the stars, that were doing these
Right.
things. And one of the things that he talked about was he does mention in his book the mistranslation of the whole Genesis 11 narrative of the Tower of Babel, where we get this idea that they were trying to build a tower into the heavens, right? But what he says is that if you actually look at what the purpose of a ziggurat was, that the top room was as the heavens.
Mm, mm.
And that's what he was saying, is that it was so. And this kind of goes to something that we can talk about in a little bit, but go ahead and talk to us about this awesome thing that you have on here. This looks really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Oh, that's yeah, the it doesn't actually say a tower reached the heaven. That's a good point. I hadn't actually, I mean, I may have come across that and forgotten it. I'm at the point where I think I forget more things than I remember, maybe.
Yes,
But
yes.
at least my children say so, right?
Right. My
So
wife for sure.
yeah, so I brought up so this is Stellarium, and anybody can get this. It's a great program. So I just wanted to point out the problem with some of the modern constellations, and I'll point out a few other things too, because I love this software. It's great. So right now you can see we have Ursa Major, and Ursa Minor. I don't know if you can see my cursor or anything, but they're right there in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of
Mm-hmm.
the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so most people know those as the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, or the bears, right? The big bear and the little bear. But
Mm-hmm.
we do have one major problem with this picture. And do you know what that is? Okay.
No, I don't. I don't.
Well,
So
I'll tell you, and you'll see it immediately.
okay.
Um, what kind of tail does a bear have?
It's usually like a nub, right?
Yeah,
It's not it's not
it's a
much of a
short
tail.
nub. It's
Yeah.
not a big, huge thing like we see in those pictures, right? So
Yeah.
we have a big problem there because bears don't have long tails. So that's been changed at some point in time. It's been changed to bears. Um, and I don't have anything. I don't know exactly when. I couldn't say, but I've read about it. And so anyway, but from my research, the better interpretation here of these two constellation would be sheep. That we have a large sheep and a small sheep. And I think even the language in the Bible speaks to the greater and lesser sheepfold. And
Mm.
I'm not gonna pull that up. I wasn't thinking about talking about this, so I didn't have it pulled up. But I know it's there somewhere. So so that's one of the interesting things. But
Mm.
since we have this up, I'm just gonna talk about a couple things
Oh, that's
that
so
are
cool.
really important. So, and I don't know if it's going to cooperate with me. I recently uh, have I put a new computer in yesterday, so I'm working on my new one. But so here we have Scorpio, right here in the
Mm.
middle, and most people are kind of familiar with Scorpio, but uh, most people are not very familiar with Ophiuchus, this guy right here, right? He is
Mm-mm.
the serpent wrestler. And this passage is really important to Genesis 3:15, the very first prophecy of the Bible, which was
Mm.
spoken by none other than Yahweh God, right? So
Mm.
um we have this prophecy, right, of the against the serpent, and so we talk about the seed of the woman, and we talk about the seed of the serpent, and how the woman's seed is going to crush his head, but he's going to crush his foot, right? That's the language that we get in the Hebrew. And oops, that I didn't mean to do that. Let me try to find it. Here we go. Um, see if I can make it center. Nope, that did not do what I wanted to do. Anyway, we'll just leave it like
Okay.
that. So,
Yeah.
but no, I don't. Now this picture is like okay, right? And every
Mm.
depiction of constellations, the pictures are going to be different because they're just artist renderings. So,
Mm.
we have to recognize that when we look at constellation pictures, that they are renderings. But it's really good actually to look at a lot of different pictures and see how people have looked at it over time. So we have the scorpion, and we literally have Ophiuchus's the wrestler's foot on his head, and then we have him stinging the other foot. As you can see in this picture,
Mm-hmm.
the his legs just kind of disappear, but in other depictions, you'll actually see him standing right on the scorpion, right? And he's
Mm-hmm.
wrestling the serpent who just happens to be reaching up towards the crown. So we have a very nice parallel in the stars to the biblical narrative, and so that off the bat is we see that in the first chapters of Genesis. Um, Now we also have other cool stuff in the stars. So we have Virgo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
anybody who's you mentioned Mike Heiser, and I'm pretty sure they had a podcast on this one time.
Mm-hmm.
But about how the sign of uh, of Revelation 12, right, was
Mm-hmm.
the woman, right, crowned in the stars, and she had the sun, clothed in the sun, and had the moon at her feet, and so we had that sign there when the sun was in the sign of Virgo and the moon. So that was signaling Christ's birth because it was the day of Yom Teruah, the Day of Trumpets, right? The first of
Mm-hmm.
Tishri. And I know Heiser's talked about that before. And also, there's a great little video called The Star of Bethlehem, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I think the quality of it's not the greatest, but it's kind of old. But where they kind of walk through stuff, doing the same thing and seeing where the sun was and whatnot. So there's a lot of really cool things in the stars. And um, so we have these signs, right? We have, these signs of the zodiac, and they go through them: Libra, Scorpio, Virgo, Leo, Cancer, the crab, Gemini, the twins, the bull of Taurus, and Aries. Now, there's a lot of, since I'm on this screen, I'm going to stop right here for a minute. Um, so there's a lot of talk. Well, most people can easily recognize Orion, and Orion's been a popular um, figure in the sky for a long time. So we have Orion. Now, I would say most of the things you're going to see him holding a club, like in this picture, or maybe even a
Mm-hmm.
sword and a shield. Here he has a club and a lion. And so the depictions of Orion have changed over time, but I feel most confident in saying, let me hold on, I may change that, take that off. I feel more confident saying that he's holding a bow and an
Mm-hmm.
arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually goes along with the ancient depiction, and everybody can see that on the screen, with the ancient depiction of him as Nimrod in the sky, the hunter, right?
Mm-hmm.
The hunter using the bow and arrow. And who is he hunting? Well, he's hunting the bull, right? He's hunting the bull, which in Hebrew is El, right? El
Mm-hmm.
or Aleph. Aleph L is the bull, and El is also the god, the Canaanite, the head god of the Canaanite pantheon. But the word is used in the Hebrew Bible, right? Quite often for God Himself. One of those words that's used for God. So that was, that's interesting that we have that there, and that's an ancient depiction. Uh, Going back, you mentioned Babylon, going back there, right?
Mm-hmm.
In ancient Sumer and whatnot. Um, and I'm just going to kind of go with things as I have them on my screen and I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking of them. Another cool one that I've looked into, and sometimes I think you said the expert, right? I don't think of
Mm-hmm.
myself as an expert all the time, but then I realized well, I do know a lot more about this than most people. So
Well, and this does seem like to be, I mean, like you just mentioned, there's three books, right? And
yeah.
like I told you, for the longest time, this and my former pastor's book were the only two books that I had on the subject, right?
Hmm.
This just does not seem to be something that a lot of people give a lot of time to. So yeah.
Yeah.
So if
And
you're
yeah.
dedicating your time to this, you're an expert in it.
Yeah, yeah, it's just funny because I know how much I don't know, right? And I think that's the key of anybody who gets the like black belt
Uh-huh.
status. I did martial arts, and so I always think
Mhm.
of things in that term, right? Like by the time
Mhm.
you get to be a black belt, you realize that you don't know very much. um
Mhm. Mhm.
but most
Mhm.
people think like that's the where it's at. You got to get a black belt.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
um
Well,
so yeah.
Socrates was says that the beginning of knowledge is to, or wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is to admit you know nothing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I've learned a few things. I've learned a few things. I'll put it that way. So here we go. Since we're right here with Orion um, and we're we got here in the middle of the screen. Uh, I mean, I think it's pronounced Eridanus. I'm not 100% sure. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But that's a Greek word, and I mentioned on the Camp Hermon podcast
Mhm.
because you know, it was all about Mount Hermon. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, where do we get this term Eridanus? And I found a paper that spoke of it, and they say that the word came from the word Jordan, the Jordan
Mhm.
River, which is in Hebrew Yarden, and we have those words right there, Iridan, which is there's this paper I found was in German, and they just briefly covered it, and so I was like, oh, well, cool. Okay, so we have like the Jordan River here. Isn't that interesting? So, but we have the river, and the river is an important constellation. Um, the river here uh, flows is down into the abyss. This area of the sky
Mm-hmm.
down here is called the abyss. Um, and so the river flows into the abyss. Now, that's not just something we see in the sky, that's something we read in ancient literature, that the
Mm-hmm.
river flows into the abyss. Well, what's the abyss? The abyss is the ocean, right? It's the deep parts of
Mm-hmm.
the ocean, and all the rivers flow into the ocean, right? So we have this um, mythical idea of the river, right? And it's what it signifies. Um, and so I use that word mythical. I think that word's important. We don't use it the way that people used to use it. Nowadays, if you say myth, people just think fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
They think something that's not true. But myth just means story, and I think that we need to get more of the story back into the Bible. I think people miss that a lot. There's something about reading the Bible, right, and reading the story, and it just speaks to us so strongly. Like, like reading David and Goliath, and having David, stand before Goliath. And I know you often ask like people's favorite books of the Bible, right? Well,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's one of my favorite um passages, which is like seems a little cliche, but like David stands there and and he's facing this giant, and I do believe he was a literal giant, and
Mm-hmm.
he's facing him, right, and he just has this chutzpah, right, about him, like he's not afraid of this guy because
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh is God, right, and he's
Mm-hmm.
on his side, and like every time I read that, it's like, oh man, like the hairs stand up on my arms, and like I'm just waiting for, like, man, this guy, like he's out there and he's not afraid, and he's taken on, God's adversaries. So there's something about reading the story. And so um so whenever I'm doing my studies, I keep an eye out for this stuff because it's kind of my wheelhouse. And so one of the things that um we see here is we see the story of Jonah. Now, where how do we
Mm-hmm.
see Jonah here? Well, all we have a bunch of elements here that speak directly to Jonah. We have the river. Well, Jonah actually mentions the river in his poem, right? When
Mm-hmm.
he's telling his little poem, he mentions the river and it's taking him down to the abyss. Well, we have the ship right here, and we have the dove, and the dove, right, of course, is Jonah's name. His name, Yonah, is dove in Hebrew, right? Now, some people have connected this to like Noah's Ark, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the dove being sent out from that. And some people say the dove, they don't think the dove was there um, in the most ancient depictions of the constellations, but we don't know. I'll just say we don't know. Like we don't have, sometimes we have an argument from silence. Like we don't have the evidence, but it doesn't mean it wasn't. So we
Mm-hmm.
don't have we
Mm-hmm.
don't have the evidence that it was definitely there, but we don't have anything that tells us differently. So um, right, we don't have it
Yep.
was made up. So there we go. We have the dove being thrown from the ship, going down into the river that takes him to the abyss, and of course Cetus, the sea monster, there as well, which I want to say, oh, I'm thinking. I don't think that Cetus is what we see, or Katos. I'm not sure if we see that in the Greek or not, or if we see fish. No, I think we see Katos in the Greek, and I think we see fish in the Hebrew,
Mm.
if I remember correctly. Um, but we see all these elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you were speaking. You mentioned like the constellations of the northern sky,
Mm-hmm.
right, and what they could view. And so you can actually see a lot of things um, in the southern hemisphere, you just can't see the most southern things. I think the Southern Cross is the most southern, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
But you
That's why
can't
it's
see
on
the
the. That's why it's
yeah.
on Australia and New Zealand's flag. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so you can see, but you can see all these things
Mm-hmm.
from Israel, from the northern hemisphere, and is
Mm-hmm.
and they're not terribly far north. So, the further north you go, the less you can see
Mm-hmm.
from the southern hemisphere. But so so there's some things from the Bible that I found really interesting, and uh, we also have, oh yeah, we have Andromeda, right? Most people,
Mm-hmm.
I think, a lot of people in who are kind of into myth and fantasy and stuff are familiar with the story of Andromeda. And right,
Mm-hmm.
we have so Andromeda, right? We have the Kraken, right? The sea monster in
Mm-hmm.
Andromeda. We have the Queen and Cepheus, the king.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think now, I told you I'm not one to get into speculation very much, but one of the things I do want to research a little bit more is, oh, I can't get it. There we go. So is um the Draco and Cepheus, um, how they work together there, because we can see them
Mm-hmm.
right up there, and they are in the northernmost part of the sky. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've actually heard some people talk about, like, the the king sitting on his throne, right,
Mm-hmm.
and having everything all kind of around him and sitting up at the top of the sky, um,
Mm-hmm.
which he kind of does, but he's not like directly in the middle. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more at some point in time, probably,
Mm-hmm.
to see about a good biblical basis for that, and not just speculate.
Well, I know that. Okay, so we're gonna take a bit of a squirrel run here in a
Okay.
second. Because so I know that the listeners that are listening right now, I mean, ultimately they're thinking about what happened about a week ago with
Mm,
with the eclipse and with all the prophecies that were being foretold and it's and again, it's very interesting that the people who, you know, um what I love about a lot of the prophetic, especially surrounding celestial events and things like that, is they're pretty vague. Okay. And the vagueness is what keeps them from having to admit that they were wrong.
mm,
So it's like, oh, well, maybe it hasn't happened yet. Well, okay, whatever. But there was something that was very, very, oh, is this the eclipse? You doing the eclipse for us?
yeah, I'm doing the eclipse for us.
All right. Well, there was a celestial event that did happen. And depending on where you were in the path of totality, you might have been able to see it. And there was, okay, so at the same exact time that the eclipse occurred, there was a planetary alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then at the same time that there was a planetary alignment, I can't remember the official name of the comet, but the nickname of the comet is the Devil's Comet,
Yep.
and largely because it has horns. Okay, that's why they called it the Devil's Comet. But what was really telling to me, and this was just something that, and I'm like, okay, if I really believed that, that there could be a celestial event that could have a portent of something coming, it would be not necessarily the eclipse, but the fact that you have the eclipse on top of all this other stuff that's happening, plus you have this comet passing through a very particular set of constellations. And one of them you
Mm,
just mentioned was Andromeda,
mm,
right? So Andromeda being rescued from the, um, or being offered
right.
to the Kraken, being rescued by, was it Perseus? I think
Yes.
Perseus rescues Andromeda. Okay. And you have Pisces in
Mm,
that. And you also have the constellation Corona. Okay. And Now, Bollinger has Corona as the sign of the Redeemer, the coming King, the second coming, those types of things. You have the Devil's Comet passing between Corona and Andromeda, okay, at the time of the eclipse. Um, and when you look at the Babylonian of Andromeda, it's Imana, okay?
Mana. Okay.
Imana, who was the courtesan of Marduk, I think. Um, I think that's who it was. And of course, we know if you've listened to Douglas Hamp, you've listened to Doug Van Dorn, and those folks, especially Gilbert, Marduk is another name for Nimrod, or another name for Enlil, or another name for Hillel, another name for the Nachash, right?
Mm.
Or the devil. Okay. So it's really interesting to me that we have that going on. So I'm gonna posit that question to you, okay, just to kind
Okay.
of throw that at you. In your research in the Bible, is there something to say? And trust me, I'm kind of on the fence on this, but I'm very interested in knowing what would you say as far as well-meaning Christians looking to the stars for that prophetic speaking, as it were.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So, because I'm not one who speculates, I generally look at stuff that people just say, um with an eye of not cynicism, but I want to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just go out there and say something, right, that's
Mm-hmm.
not true, especially when it comes to like biblical prophecy and things like that. Um I do think it's interesting. So Andromeda, I kind of got into that a little bit when looking into Jonah and the
Mm-hmm.
picture of Jonah, and that story, mentioned Andromeda, like that is tied to um Jonah. There's elements that are tied to it. And, I mean, the this threw me for a loop when I went to Israel back in 2020, before everything got crazy. It We went out to where were we? Um, Yafo, Joppa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Jonah went. He went to Yafo to get on a boat to go to Tarshish. And we get out there, and it's the first night that we're there, and it's beautiful. And the guide is talking to us, and he points out, we're standing out there. He points out, to the Mediterranean Sea, to these rocks out there, and he says, "Those are the rocks that Andromeda was sacrificed on." I said, "What?" And I had to
Okay.
look it up, right? I had to look. I was like, "What? I mean, what is he talking about?" And sure enough, um, that story is set there in Joppa, and Andromeda was put on those rocks right there, and like, so we have this tie. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I would postulate, and you have to go a little bit onto the symbolism here. I would postulate that Andromeda is a picture of the Bride of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now,
Mm-hmm.
is there anything in the Bible that says, "Oh, this is that"? It doesn't. It doesn't. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will be straightforward and say it does not. But, um,
We
like the
allow for
picture,
speculation, by the way.
huh?
We allow for speculation. You are allowed to
Okay, okay.
speculate.
But here's the thing about myth, right? When we're talking about mythic stuff, and I studied some of this stuff way back many years ago when I was doing some philosophy and religion, and we were studying Carl Jung and things. And And so here's the thing about myth. Myth speaks to us on a different level. It's not supposed to be taken literally. It's supposed to, you're supposed to see the elements and understand the recognition. So, if you want to, you can see the bride of Christ in that story if you just look at it, right? Being set out, right? And the
Mhm.
beast is going to come out of the sea and devour her,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
oh, that's like Revelation, right? I mean, just like
Mhm.
all these images that overlap. And I think that a lot of images from the secular world do overlap the story, right? The story of humanity and God and what God's doing. So I think that we can see a lot in culture that's
Mhm.
not necessarily spelled out for us in the Bible like that. But we can see a lot of these things that carry over into the culture, and so that's
Well,
one of them.
I did have a question. Okay.
Yeah.
So on that, and this is just something that comes to my mind because I mean, I will be honest with you. Okay. There were just a lot of, okay, to borrow a new age type saying, there were a lot of synchronicities. Okay. When you
Yeah.
get into the world of high strangeness, okay,
Yes. Yes.
synchronicities start happening. And there were a lot of synchronicities that began to start happening as we got near 4/8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions that I have, and again, I'm calling on your scholarship here, and you can, and if this is something that you can't speak into, it's fine.
Okay.
Would this have been something that would have been part of the Jewish tradition of the ancient Near East? Would they have, because we have the story of the Magi
Yes.
that responded to the star, right?
hmm
Responded to all of the prophets prophetic. So when we're looking at the apostles, right? When we're looking at the men of the apostles, is this something that their culture would have respected? Looking at the stars, seeing the stars as a portent to something that was going to occur.
Yeah. Yeah. So the culture in general, 100% would see things just like our culture does today, right? Even very non-biblical people um, see these things and they say, "Oh man, there's something happening." Right? I mean, even hear like people who maybe aren't believers and they say, "Man, it looks like something biblical is happening." Like I mean, people use that terminology. They recognize that there's something big happening. They don't maybe know what it is.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so, like when we had all this stuff, over the past couple months, anybody who was, online and interested in the eclipse at all probably came across some of these things like oh, it's traveling over all these cities named Nineveh, and you're like, okay, well, like two, not eight. Like
right.
uh like if you just did a little bit of research, you'd be like, okay, there's not much to this. Well, some of the stuff there was, like, I saw somebody, and I'm not going to go to their conclusion,
Mhm,
but they mentioned that the sun was that the eclipse happened on the band of Pisces right here. And I was like,
mhm,
does it really? I thought, surely they're just, it's close, right? It's close. Well, no,
mhm,
it's like right there, right? It's like right on the
mhm,
band. So, you can
mhm,
see it. It's pretty self-evident
mhm.
there. So,
Okay.
I think that the ancients seeing this, like I went and saw the eclipse and it was awesome. I mean, it's an eclipse and I've been lucky enough to see two in my lifetime. Um, and of course I had to travel to see both of those. So, but
Yeah.
we have that ability now. One of the cool things was when we saw the eclipse in the sky, you didn't have to look very hard, and you could see Jupiter and you could see Venus.
Mhm,
Like they were just right there.
mhm,
You couldn't see Mars and Saturn. Those are harder to see. Mars
mhm,
being red, and Saturn being just so distant. But you know, um, to me, this is what we have right here in the sky is very interesting. I don't know
Mm,
if it's significant.
mhm,
It is very interesting. And it's one of those things that would make me open my eyes a little bit and say, okay, the ancients certainly would have seen this as interesting and
mhm,
maybe a portent, right? Maybe
mhm,
something happening here.
mhm,
That doesn't mean that there was something about it. The Bible doesn't really go into that stuff a lot, right? They when it
mm,
talks about, when you see the ancient world talking about like, the signs in the sky, usually it's more astrological, like, it's fortune telling, and it's, oh well, this is happening, so bad stuff's gonna happen, tomorrow. Or like, I had a teacher many years ago, and she had a friend who was really into astrology and sometimes wouldn't leave her house, if her fortune wasn't telling her something good, like, you got to be kidding me. So, uh, like, that doesn't seem to jive with the Bible very well. However, uh, we have a lot of evidence that the zodiac, that they had some ideas about this stuff. We see zodiacs in, um, uh, oh, the word escaped me. Not the temple, but the synagogues. The
mhm,
synagogues in ancient Israel, in I shouldn't say ancient Israel, but in the Second Temple period, when they were building synagogues. We don't know how early they built synagogues. We think probably they started building them when they were in Babylon,
mhm,
because before that they were building high places, right?
mhm,
And so that was bad. So they started building synagogues to have a place to meet in. But we have, there's a lot of depictions of the zodiac in the synagogues, so they had some sort of understanding, even though it's
mhm,
not completely spelled out.
mhm,
um and so there's, Josephus talks about, and I think he's not the only one, but he's the one that
mhm,
most people are familiar with, and he talks about the tabernacle setup being, um kind of the sign, being a representative of the heavens, with things like even the candelabra, right? The seven branch menorah there being representative
mhm,
of the seven planet or the seven lights in the
mhm,
sky, which we see right here, right? We see one, two, three, four, and five,
mhm,
six, seven.
mhm,
Uranus, I don't think that they counted that one right. It was the sun,
mhm,
moon, and the others that
mhm,
you could see with the naked eye. But here we have all of them. Even Neptune is somewhere, I know, in this
mhm.
little thing. The only
Well,
one we don't have here is Pluto. But all the rest of them are right here in this little bitty section, which is amazing. That's
mhm.
to have all of them there, in that kind of conjunction space, right?
Well,
Usually,
and
yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to
Hmm.
interrupt, but I'm just really excited. Okay, for first of all, I actually misspoke when I talked about Corona. The comet didn't go by Corona. There's actually going to be a supernova
Oh,
in
okay.
Corona that's going to be visible between now and then. But it actually did. The comet went through Pisces and Andromeda
Mm.
at the same exact time that this is going on and all of this is happening. The comet is going through Pisces and Andromeda. And I mean, when you started talking about, because one of the things that you heard regularly, especially a lot of the prophets, quote unquote, was that, this was the sign of Jonah. Well, no, 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 no. Jesus was very clear about what the sign of Jonah
Yes.
was. Okay.
Yes.
The sign of Jonah
Yes.
was his
Thank you.
resurrection. Okay. That Jesus didn't mince words when he said what the sign of Jonah was. But if we're looking at all of these synchronicities, right? All of this stuff that's happening, even okay, so explain to me what would be the significance of the eclipse being on what you said, the band of Pisces?
Oh, that's one of those things that was speculation that I saw. I'm like, I'm
Hmm.
not too sure about that. And
Hmm.
so, but so a lot of people connect Pisces with Christianity because of
Hmm.
the symbol of the fish. Okay.
Hmm. hmm
I don't think that that's the best idea. I just
Mhm.
don't. I don't think that, just, oh, it's a fish, so it must be, that's a symbol of Christianity. Well, if that was the case, we go to the other symbols that are fish and say they're representative of Christianity too. Like,
Right.
we can't just say like, what is it? Correlation is not causation, right? They're not the same
Hmm.
thing. So,
Hmm.
I don't, just because that's what, and they say that because they're familiar with the fish. They're not as familiar with the other things, though, which, they're not familiar with uh, the lamb, Aries. They, if they might be, but that you have to think, oh, that's when we get to Passover, right? And so, Passover, originally occurred in Aries, in the sign of the Lamb. Passover was happening. Um, so I found it interesting though that it was, when they were pointing out some of these things in the little thing I saw, um, and about it, and they were talking about it. But Pisces, I wouldn't go and say Pisces is a symbol of Christianity. They were talking about like, oh, the shackles are going to be broken and
Hmm.
whatever. I'm like, no, that's
That's
not
Andromeda.
really what I've seen in the past when it's talking about Pisces. Okay.
Right, right.
um yeah, so yeah,
Well,
the
and I'm looking at Bullinger's work right here,
mhm,
and Bullinger refers to Pisces as really, he says it's a representative of God's seed. That it's he goes into talking about that in ancient Egypt, the Dendera zodiac is Piscat Orion or Pisces Horai, which means the fishes of him that cometh.
mm,
All right. The Hebrew name is Dachim, the fishes, which is closely connected to the multitudes, as Genesis 48:26, where Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. And so Siriatic is Nuno, the fish. Okay, but where he goes into is that he starts mentioning like the seed, which is Pisces being Israel. Um,
mm.
how's that
So
measure?
so when we see the, I'm not going to say it can't be. I'll put it that way.
Right,
I'm not going to say it
right.
can't be. Okay. So one thing that we do see is that the 12 signs of the zodiac, they were viewed in the ancient world. Everybody knew them, or the 12
Mm-hmm.
houses. I really prefer the term houses, because
Mm-hmm.
it designates more than just those signs.
Mm-hmm.
But these, I mean, our entire basis of time is based on this, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
12 hours in a day. You're like, why do
Mm-hmm.
we have that? Well, it's because of this. Okay. Um, it's not a mathematical thing. Like they had these 12 signs, these 12 houses, that were seen to mark off, um, time, throughout the year. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, there is a direct correlation, between what we see in Jacob's blessing, Balaam's prophecy, and the Song of Moses. All of those go together. People don't know, like, you have to read those together. Well, you don't have to, but if you want to understand them, you have to
Mm-hmm.
look at them all together because they all say things a little bit differently, but they're all talking about the same thing. Um, it was like, I listened to, this is my new favorite thing, and maybe one day I'll get tired of talking about it, but I listened to the was the Bible, and uh oh, it was the Bible podcast. What's the fellas that they do the cartoons and stuff, you know who I'm talking about?
Oh
The
yeah,
Bible
yeah.
Project, the Bible
Project
Project.
project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were talking about, they're like, the Bible's like the movie Tenet, and they started going off about this stuff. I'm like, oh my goodness, it really is. Like, if you haven't seen Tenet, you just got to see it and watch it like
Haven't.
5 times to understand it. So, um, but but
Curse you,
like,
Christopher Nolan.
yeah, yeah, it moves, but the like stuff in the Bible, like we have things in the Bible that don't make sense until later, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
Moses took the bronze serpent and put it on upon a pole. What does that mean? Why would
Mm-hmm.
that cure these people? That doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
any sense at all. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't get any explanation of it until Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, this is me. You're like, what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
so like there's things like that in the Bible. And so like we have you know the ancients had an understanding of the sky that we don't have. They just it's kind of lost to us, and we have to do a lot of research to try to figure things out.
Mhm.
But Jacob had it, Balaam had it, Moses had it. They all had this same understanding because they spoke of things and they matched the signs of the zodiac. The stuff they spoke about concerning the 12
Mhm.
tribes matched the zodiac. So they were basically looking at the tribes and they're saying, this is the heavens, right?
Mhm.
These represent the heavens. And we have a
Mhm.
picture of that, right? In the
Yeah.
tabernacle setup in the wilderness. So, I mean, it's really exciting to me because, like, oh man, this is just like this is something beyond me. Like I couldn't
Mhm.
come up with this, right?
Mhm.
This is so much bigger. And so
Yeah,
uh
it's really incredible because when you read, and this is why part of the initial when we're starting our spiritual warfare, we've got a spiritual warfare boot camp that I don't know how many parts it's going to be. It's going to be whatever it is, but it is because I don't know if you're ever done training. But the
right.
boot camp itself, we'll go into advanced individual training, things like that. I mean, I'm really taking a militaristic point of view for this, and you being in North Carolina, you understand that because I mean, Fort Bragg's right there, in Camp Lejeune.
It's not
But
Fort Bragg anymore, it's something else.
oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot they named it something else because God forbid it be named after a Confederate general. But but it was, but even the way that Moses or that God ordained that the tribes break camp
Yes.
and then the way that the 12 constellations are broken up with those tribes. I was just looking at the way that Bollinger, had it. And, you've got the Eastern camp, the Western camp, the Northern camp, the Southern camp, and the first ones to leave, the first ones to walk ahead of the camp when they break down the tabernacle and they move on is Judah, and that's the
Yeah.
lion, and the
Yeah.
lion is heading out. But and Simeon, when we were talking about Pisces, Simeon or Simon, it's Simeon, right? It's Simeon.
Simeon.
Simeon is the Pisces. It is the fish. It is
Well,
the, you know,
so I will go. I don't remember what Bollinger. I know they all the three who wrote back then, Francis Ralston, that's who's the other one is
Ralston.
Rolleston. But I think hers was first, and then Sison Bollinger
Mhm.
wrote after her. They did all have some slightly different ideas. When I was doing research, I came up with different ideas too from
Okay.
them. The one thing that I would I think we can know for certain is the cardinal directions, right?
Mm.
Um, we know the four cardinal directions, and that would be Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio,
Hmm.
and Leo, wherever Leo is, somewhere
He's around there somewhere.
there
That
he is,
pesky
there
lion.
in Leo, right? So those are our four cardinal directions of the zodiac,
Hmm.
which represent the entirety of heaven. All right, the
Hmm.
four. If you study number four and how it's used in Scripture, the four winds or whatever, it's always kind of representing totality.
Hmm.
Um, and so we
Four's my
know the
number, by the way.
four.
I
What?
love the number four.
Oh
Four's
yeah.
my number. Yeah.
Cool,
So.
cool. So we know that we do know that those four who were in the center represent those. Those are really easy. Reuben is Aquarius,
Hmm.
and Leo is Judah, and what am I other? So Joseph is Taurus,
Hmm.
and so that's language from Genesis 49 that
Hmm.
our weird language about Joseph only makes sense. That's one of those that kind of proves it. It only makes sense in the context of the constellation Taurus.
Hmm.
Because it's just the language is so weird, it doesn't make any other sense. And you have to look at you can't just look at an English rendering of it either. You have to look at the Hebrew
Hmm.
um and understand that there's Hebrew words that are spelled the same, right? We would say maybe homonym in English, right? They sound the same. I don't know if that's right,
Mm,
but anyway, they're
mhm,
spelled the same with the same consonants, but sometimes they're translated a different way. They have different vowel pointing, and so we see that in Taurus with that, right? And then what did I say was our fourth one? uh Covered that. Oh, and Scorpio with
mm,
Dan. Those
mm,
those are very easy to identify. The others are less so easy to identify.
mhm,
um but yeah, the way that they moved and everything, like all that stuff, right? It's all symbolic.
mhm,
And so they had a high degree of symbolism in their life. We
mhm,
don't really, we have symbols, but it's different today, right? We don't, our lives don't revolve around this symbolism. um
mhm,
and even in the Bible, it goes into things like the sabbatical cycle, right? I mean, you have the
mhm,
the weekly Sabbath, you have the monthly Sabbath, you have, or the day, yeah, the Sabbath of days, Sabbath of weeks, Sabbath of months, Sabbath of years, right? Um and then the Sabbath of Sabbath years, right? The Jubilee, the Yovel. So like even those things go into it, and into this cyclical pattern. And that's really what the zodiac is, right? It's a cyclical pattern that represents totality of everything. And so this is why for me it's become more than just studying the astral language, but it's also studying the cosmology of the ancient Hebrews.
mm,
If we try to have a biblical worldview, um, then we should try to understand cosmology the same way that they did.
mm,
Um, and we can get that by looking at cultures in the ancient Near East, and get a little bit of, well, what did the cultures think? Because they were a part of the culture. They were against the culture in many ways,
mhm,
but they were still a part of the culture. So there's going to be some carryover in that. Um, but I
mm,
mean, I think that the eclipse was. I think that there's something going on there. I don't know.
mhm, mhm,
I don't want to speculate on what it means, right? Because
mm,
I don't think we have anything in scripture that is going to say this means that, right? I don't think
mhm,
that we can do that. And I think that that's the temptation of a lot of people, right? They want to say, "Oh, this is so neat. Like there's things happening, and there's got to be meaning to it, right?" And like some of the stuff I saw, I think people were like talking about like judgment, right?
right.
Like the judgment of America and stuff. I'm like, you know what? You don't really have to look at the sky to see that America needs judgment.
That is
Um,
so true. That is so
like
true.
it,
Yeah, well, and I'll be honest with you. I think this is a really good point for us to start kind of closing up, wrapping up here. We're definitely going to have you come back because I want to talk about that cosmology. I want to come back
okay.
and really explore that cosmology from a perspective of the ancient Near East, because I think that is important. And I think that's going to help our viewers. I really do. I think that's going to help our viewers and in our people listening to this podcast. I think understanding um, how to interpret scripture from that perspective, because
Yes.
there's some weird things in there that, like what you were talking about with the description of Joseph and being the bull, and then but there's other connotations with that bull as well, with
Yes.
and so understanding that. But so one of the things that I do want to kind of leave us with is so there were, like what you were talking about with the eclipse, right, was the judgment. And my wife and I, we both operate in different gifts of the spirit,
Mm,
especially when it comes to different gifts of the prophetic. And we don't claim to be prophets. I'm not a prophet. I won't claim that at all. I do think God has given me an ability to kind of discern things. I have definitely have a gift of discernment.
Mm.
And one of the things that I have is being able to see patterns. Now, some people may say that, that may mean you're schizophrenic. And hey, who knows? Maybe I am. I don't know. But I see patterns.
Yes.
I'm very much a strategic thinker. It's one of the things that has made me very successful in politics.
Mm.
But my wife is gifted with the gift of seeing. God speaks to her in visions and in really interesting ways, and so it's just really cool. And her family are very much in that, and I do think that there is a connection because she's Native American,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yeah.
And matter of fact, her tribe comes from North Carolina. She's part of the Lumbee tribe,
Okay.
out of one of it's anyways, it's a river in western North Carolina. I can't remember, but that's where the Lumbee tribe is. They're part of the Cherokee Nation. And and so anyways, but one of the things that she and I were talking about, and it really spoke true to us, is sometimes God's like, hey, go look at a 4-8 scripture, right? Or go look at a scripture with this number in it, right?
Hmm.
And we'll look at it, and man, it just boom, it speaks, right?
Gotcha.
And so the scripture that was speaking to her, and when I read it, I went, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think this was the word that I think there were two words. I'm not going to go to the other one, but because again, I'm not a prophetic, I'm not a prophet, but this is one that I am going to go into, and this is it is Philippians 4:8, and this is what I want to leave our people with is fine. And if you are familiar with Philippians 4:8, you know where I'm going with this. But I think this is counterintuitive to what a lot of these judgment people were talking about. As is finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate of these things. And I honestly think that when you were talking about that, there might have been a message to the church, that you're talking about the bride of the church, when you were talking about Andromeda,
Hmm.
when you were talking about Pisces, when you were talking about those things, I really do I think it was God saying, hey, come back to me.
Hmm.
Focus on the good things, focus on the noble things, focus on those things. Well, brother, I thank you so much for coming on. I thank you so much for taking this time away from your family
Yeah.
and away to come and talk to us. We will have you back on. I'm hoping maybe we can get you back on, maybe sometime in July. That's
Okay.
what we're looking at. Okay, I'll shoot you a date. But guys, again, this is Brandon Black. He's coming at us with the cosmology of the ancients and just blowing our minds. You got to bring the map back. You got to bring that back. I was loving that. I was digging that, man. That was so cool. All right. Well, hey, with that being said, guys, that is going to conclude our podcast for tonight. May God bless you. May he keep you. May he shine his countenance upon you, and may he give you rest. And with that, we out.